Geek Out! Hey, this is a special episode of Geek Out. We've got Matt Hawkins, president of Top Cow Entertainment, back on our program. He's here to promote the Stairway Kickstarter. It's the latest graphic novel through Top Cow Entertainment. Him and Rafaenko are doing a book about what happens when you can find secrets stored in your DNA, because they're just finding out now, apparently, that you can store info in DNA strands, which is really fucking cool. But yeah, so they're kickstarting that book. The book itself is done, but they're going it for distribution and honestly as marketing, and Matt says as much in this interview. The Kickstarter is in the link. You can see it in the link for this, and it runs until the 21st. But we really do talk about the general state of Top Cow in general. We talk about the general state of Top Cow in general. Let's just keep that fuck up in there. Let's just do that. But you know what? You know who doesn't fuck up? Matt Hawkins. Let's let him talk. And coming back on the show, we got Matt Hawkins, the president and chief creative officer of Top Cow Entertainment. You can also follow Matt's work. He's the writer of Think Tank, the Golgotha Kickstarter, which just came out, Cemetery, which is coming back, the Warframe comic, which is recently just launched, and he's the writer of the upcoming Kickstarter project Stairway. Matt, thanks again for coming on the show.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. That sounds like a lot, but I realized I spread all that stuff out. Like Stairway actually is completely finished and has been done for a while. We're trying to figure out when would be a good time to launch it and all that stuff. And Golgotha, Warframe, actually that stuff's pretty much done too. So almost all the stuff you mentioned I've already done. There's about 8 other things that you didn't mention because I haven't announced them yet.
Oh, so. Well, if you want to offer any scoops, I won't stop you. But
Well, Swing, you mentioned Swing, I think, before we got on here. That's a big initiative. There's 2 books that sort of spin off of Sunstone that I've been working on. One with Linda Sedgwick and my wife, and that's called Swing. It'll be an original graphic novel, which will come out in April, which coincidentally, Linda just posted the first 20 pages on her DeviantArt as a free webcomic today. Mm-hmm. So the book will be a 128-page original graphic novel, but she's going to release most of it on her DeviantArt for free so people can read it and sample it and see if they're into it before they actually buy it. And it definitely ties into like the Sunstone universe, so we're still hoping to sort of cross over with those fans. And then I'm doing another book with my wife and another artist named Yishin Lee, we're doing a book called Sugar, which is another sort of what we're calling the sex-positive books that we do. I jokingly, I saw the Sedgwicks in New York, and I said, what should we call this, Sunstone sort of universe? And Linda actually said, we should call it the Perverse. And I laughed for a long time. Like PER-VERSE, double entendre, of course, meant. We're probably not going to do that, but it got a good laugh, so... Right now, we're just calling it the Sunstone universe. But the idea of all these is they're sort of slice of life romance books, which are atypical for me and atypical for Top Cow, and honestly are sort of coming out of the insane success of Sunstone. And I have a crazy newfound respect for romance writers because Jesus Christ, that shit is hard to write. Well, look at what I've done in the past. Think Tank is the military-industrial complex. You've got Aphrodite 9, which is basically spaceships fighting dragons. You've got all this stuff, which is so easy to make visually interesting. Do you know how hard it is to make a couple fighting in a bar look visually interesting? It's impossibly hard. And I worked with the Sedgwicks, and it was about 10 drafts of Swing before I got it right. And then I wrote Sugar after I wrote Swing, and Linda actually emailed me and said, you finally figured this out because you nailed Sugar in the first draft. And I'm like, great, because I don't like writing 10 drafts. That's a lot of time. So yeah, there's that. And but that's, I'm working on a new volume of Symmetry. God, what else am I doing?
You're saying Warframe's already done?
Do what?
You're saying you've already wrapped on Warframe from a writing perspective?
Yeah, the writing perspective. I'm co-writing with Ryan Katie on that book, and I sort of wrote the original outline, and I'm editing it with him, but he's doing sort of the grind work of it. He plays the game, and he knows that universe a lot better than me, so we sort of broke it down, and I wrote the initial outline, sort of a lengthy outline that they approved, and he actually is going through and sort of breaking down the individual issues, and I'm doing a pass on scripts and stuff like that. So it's more of kind of a tandem effort. But that actually is really easy to do. It's very easy for me to work with someone I trust and I know I can write well with. It's why it's working with either Ryan or Brian Hill makes my life very, very easy.
So, you had the first issue of Warframe and the first issue of God Complex at New York Comic Con. You guys had, I believe it was pinups of Swing Sugar, or was it the Ash Can at New York? What was the response to those?
The response was great. I don't remember how many we brought, but we sold all of them. We were just selling those for $5 a piece because Linda was there and I was there and my wife was there. And my wife doesn't normally sign or do any public appearances. And we were all able to sign those books. And Linda and Stjepan, are from Croatia, so they don't come to the U.S. very often. I guess New York took a big toll out of them because they told me they aren't coming back to the U.S. next year.
Damn.
So whoever came to New York Comic Con and this last couple weeks ago probably saw the Sedgwicks for the last time for a couple years.
Damn. Was the experience of having Artist Alley in the basement as opposed to the annex a better experience for you guys?
It was honestly about the same for me. I'd say the only difference was we definitely felt the squeeze of space. Like the tables were a couple feet shorter. There was less space in the aisles. And, I had to jump over my table because they put me in the middle of like 6 other people. So I'd have to crawl behind their booths in order to get to mine. So I just vaulted over the table to mine, which was interesting. So I don't know. I mean, it's fine. I know it's a temporary stopgap for them. I like being in Artist Alley. Image sets up its huge sort of corporate booth, so I don't need to set up a giant corporate booth and spend all that money. And they sell some of our stuff up there, and we sell some of the stuff downstairs. It actually works out very well for us. So I'm really happy with the way New York Comic Con works out. I kind of wish we could do something similar with San Diego, but it's not the same setup.
Well, shedding a little behind the scenes stuff. I work with the Image crew. That's actually how you and I first met, doing an interview for Samaritan Veritas back in the day for Image Plus. The most popular variant that we had at the Image booth was God Complex.
That's great.
So yeah,
that makes me very happy since I published that book. No, that book actually is Sonny Go, a studio out of Indonesia. Sonny, most people know as a colorist, and he colored all of Mark Silvestri's stuff on Cyberforce, and he did Mark's stuff earlier on a couple other projects too. And he's actually working on Mark's secret project from DC that'll be out sometime next year that he's been working on for 3 years now. But Sonny came to me about a year ago and had these 3 properties he really wanted to develop out. He'd already done a bunch of toys on them. God Complex, there's a series of toys that are already available in Asia. And we're trying to figure out a way to get them over here or recreate them for the U.S. market. But they're just some kick-ass designs. And he pitched me these 3 projects and asked if I'd be interested in working with him to try to Americanize them a little bit and find an editor and publish them. And so we worked out that deal, and I brought Paul Jenkins and Brian Hill on. I brought Paul on God Complex, and then I brought Brian on Bonehead, which is not actually out yet, but that book also looks amazing. I don't know if you've seen anything from that, but part of the Glitch line, which there's 3 titles, and God Complex is the first. And I'm really, really stoked with how that book came out. It has just a really amazing look to it.
Yeah, that one's amazing, but I have to ask, what Image doesn't normally, or Top Cow doesn't normally do video game adaptations. I know you guys had the Top Cow or the Tomb Raider license once upon a time. What made Warframe the right video game to do an adaptation for?
They asked. I mean, honestly, it just came out that Sheldon emailed me 6 months ago and said, would you guys be interested in doing that comic book on Warframe? And we sort of worked out the deal. And that was more based on the relationship. I mean, we don't do a lot of licensed comics really at all. So, for us, it's more about trying to maintain relationships and do stuff that makes sense for us. So I did that more as a relationship thing than anything.
Well, that's cool. We've kind of danced around the big topic. You guys have launched. Is this Top Cow's 4th Kickstarter in about, I guess, 2 years with Stairway?
I think it's more like 5 years because I think we launched Cyberforce 4 or 5 years ago, wasn't it?
That's right. Yeah, my bad. Yeah.
I mean, we did Cyberforce in 2012, I think it was, and then we did September Morning like 3 years ago or 2 years ago, and then we did what was the other one? We did Golgotha earlier this year, and then we did this one. So yeah, here's the thing with Kickstarter. I sort of see it as a marketing opportunity and a distribution outlet. I know that a lot of indie creators crowdfunding as a means of getting their project made. So for them, it's more about, this is please help my dream come true. I'm sort of pretty blunt with people. If you read the interviews and what I say, the thing is, this book is done. By contributing to the campaign, you're not actually helping us get the book out because the book's going to come out anyway. So for us, it's about, we're offering some exclusives that are available only through the Kickstarter. We're offering an exclusive cover. So if you want a original graphic novel with a variant cover on it that's unavailable to people outside of the Kickstarter, you can have that opportunity. There's also some other cool stuff in there that you can get. To me, it's an additive thing. When we did Golgotha, it was a big experiment for me because I was curious because I the people who complain about crowdfunding are usually like companies doing crowdfunding. They're one of two things. They're either you'll hear it from a few retailers because they don't think it's fair because you're offering something that they can't get. You'll also hear it mainly from creators, like indie creators who think it's unfair that we're taking, I guess, money away from them. But to me, that's not what the platform was there for. We've worked with Kickstarter, and I've talked to Indiegogo and some of these people about developing content. And there's people at big companies that put Kickstarters on all the time. That's ultimately what Kickstarter and those people are kind of pursuing is trying to make it more of a distribution outlet. So we're taking advantage of that. And Golgotha was a big experiment for me because I realized after we did the successful Kickstarter, I said, hey, I wonder if, our numbers through Diamond, our numbers through Amazon, and our numbers through Comixology and digital and all these numbers, I wonder if they're going to be affected and they're going to be lower because of this Kickstarter. The assumption was that would be correct, that our numbers through the other channels would actually be lower. Lo and behold, Golgotha, the graphic novel that's actually available to the rest of the market, comes out this Wednesday. It comes out October 25th. I don't know when this will air, but that's in store October 25th, which, the people who got it from the Kickstarter got it six months ago. So you get it earlier, you get an exclusive cover. There were some stickers, some pens, and some lithos and some other stuff that was available through the Kickstarter. But the crazy thing about Golgotha was our numbers were up in every channel. And so I look at that and I'm like, wow, okay, so this is an additive distribution model that reaches certain people that we don't otherwise reach. So it's an important model. I think it's a valuable thing that can be used by companies to reach additional fans and get sort of stuff into channels that makes sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And how does it? I mean, I think people are still trying to figure out how the industry works. A lot of people are like, so do miniseries sell better? Do OGNs sell better? And you guys kind of have a very interesting slice of the both image pie, but just the image comics or just the comic market in general. And I always think that's Archie tried to kickstart some of their stuff, I guess, a couple of years ago. But it if anything, it makes more sense with Top Cow because again, you're not a licensed company at all. This is all creator owned. Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, what made you want to do a story about like the secrets of DNA and that sort of thing?
Well, these are projects I wanted to do anyway. You know what I mean? So for me, these are things that I was working on, and I just was not sure which methodology we were going to use to release it, whether we're going to release as here's what I have discovered of late, is that miniseries format things that are collected into single graphic novels, they don't sell that great. And when we've done them recently, our sales have been lesser than I would have liked. And then we did this Golgotha book, and it exceeded my expectations. So we're just evaluating. I'm not going to run Kickstarters or Indiegogos. We're not going to crowdfund every single project. Like I've said that pretty publicly. I might do one or two of these a year, and that's it. I don't. Plus, you got to keep in mind. I mean, doing the fulfillment and doing all the packaging and sending all this stuff out, and dealing with customer service. It's time consuming, and we want to make sure we do a good job and we maintain those fans. So we try to go above and beyond. But the reason why I did it with Stairway was because the book was done. I was looking at how I was going to release it. I'm like, I can release this as four 32-page comics with 20 to 22 pages of story and art, or I can release this as an OGN, like a 128-page graphic novel, and put some added content in the back. We had just done a couple other books where we were looking at sort of the miniseries model, and the sales were a little less than kind of what I expected. So, just looking at in every case, people, this is what I tell fans all the time and readers. I said, vote with your dollar, because that's how publishers react. I mean, that's exactly how we react. And I think what the successful Go Gothic Kickstarter did for us was it actually was kind of a bit of a marketing thing for the series, because it was out, it was well publicized during the event of the window when it was being pledged and run, and it was successful. It doubled its goal. So that's a positive thing. And so obviously people, and then, the Kickstarter people were getting the book and they were commenting about how much they liked the book. And so it was sort of this great word of mouth thing. And and so I'm trying to replicate that with Stairway.
You were mentioning sales earlier, and I got to know, because at the risk of getting my nose brown, it was my favorite book in the Edenverse. Is this really the end of David Lauren and the Think Tank series?
No. Who knows? I mean, I love that character too much. Just in the immediate, I'm actually writing a prose novel about Think Tank. And I'm working on that, and but I do think there will be additional graphic novels. The problem with Think Tank is that book takes me a long time to write, because I work so hard to make it correct, authentic, and scientifically accurate. So that book takes me about twice as long to write as anything else I do. And then when I look at sort of the time invested and the sales of the titles, but the thing is with Think Tank, a lot of the sales on that book are trades, and I had sort of built out that model where we were doing 4 or 5 issue miniseries and then collecting it into a volume. And then the problem with the volumes 3 and 4, the sales on those were about the same. And then we did volume 5, and the 32-page sales really dropped. I know there was a year gap in between, but there's been a year gap between each of the arcs. So I don't know if that's a function of what the current industry is like. I know there's so much competition right now and so many books being published. There are like 2,000 comics or some ridiculous number like that are coming out on a monthly basis. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I remember the last time you were on, you were thinking about taking the characters of Think Tank and kind of reorienting them more like to young adult fiction.
Yeah, that's what the novel is about. I mean, that actually is what the novel is about. And the novel itself will be a sort of a new continuity, because one of the things I realized is because I wanted to write a book where he was 14 and first approached by the military and what that experience was like. Now, initially, I did a timeline where I realized, okay, he would have been 14 in 1996 or whatever it was. And then I started researching the technology of 1996, and I'm like, wait a minute, this is supposed to be a cutting edge sort of science book with really advanced tech. If I'm writing something in a 1996 time frame, it's going to feel very dated. So I really spent a lot of time thinking about that. Plus, it'd be a pain in the ass to write, because then you'd have to be very specific about time frames, and and every time I see a movie come out where they do that, there's always 1 or 2 things that are published like, oh, this movie was dated April of 2006, and this didn't come out till May of 2006. These guys got it wrong. I see those lists, and so I don't want to be on one of those.
Sure.
So I decided to actually write it set in the present. So the prose fiction, the prose verse for Think Tank will actually be set in the current era, and he'll be 14 now. So it'll be the same story, the same characters, but it'll be sort of a different continuity. And I do think I'll get back to the graphic novels at some point. What sort of happened with Think Tank was I spent a lot of time developing it originally with Mark Gordon as a film, and that went nowhere. And then I was developing it with Legendary Television for a TV series, and that ultimately went nowhere. And I just got the rights back in January. It's October now, and I've been sort of retooling it, trying to figure out what to do with it, and we're probably going to take it back out for TV again. But we've had a lot of interest in that project over the years, because it's since it's not fantasy and it's not science fiction, it's actually relatively shootable, for a budget. Mm-hmm. And we've been developing that out. So between that, Postal, and some of these other things, the hope is that this other media, because it seems that what really sells books these days is other media.
I mean, Robert Kirkman's been reaping the benefits for years.
Yes, and we certainly noticed those sales. So yeah, no, it kudos to him.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I mean, he's sort of doing stuff. But we're working hard, man. We're really trying.
Yeah, I mean, you're no stranger to Top Cow adaptations. I mean, I feel like, Mark Miller, if it wasn't for Wanted, would we have Kingsman? Would we have Kick-Ass? And that, I think a lot of people need to remember that Wanted is a Top Cow book.
Right. Yeah, people seem to forget that, and it's been a long-standing. It's such a great book, and Mark's certainly gone on to his massive fame, and here's the thing: with all these people doing these adaptations, the film and TV adaptations, we don't ever sit back and be like, fuck those guys. I mean, because every time it happens and one is successful, we always want them to be successful because that means there's going to be more of a taste for them. Hollywood and these people are very follow the money, so the second something works, you'll see 5 other things be put into development. I think it's a good problem, but the problem that we've run into with Top Cow and with Mark Silvestri and myself, especially on some of these projects, is we actually care a lot. So we get in there and we get involved and we talk about the projects, and sometimes that's, we could have had multiple Witchblade movies made in the last 15 years. If you realize that TV series was on the air in 2000, 2001, that's 16 years ago?
God.
We've had multiple films developed that we've killed because they were shitty, and that's one of the reasons why I've always enjoyed working with Silvestri so much, is because he's always told me that, these things need to be good and we need to make sure they're good because and we always use the Talissa Soto Vampirella movie as an example. And I may have even said this the last time I was on your podcast, but that's a movie people have forgotten about. But it actually killed Harris Publications. And, it was a movie that came out. It was shitty. It sort of killed any momentum the comic itself had. And, for us, Witchblade has been sort of a bit of a cash cow, and we're in the process of relaunching that now. It comes out in December.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you've also, is there still a plan to relaunch Cyberforce at the end of the year, too?
Yeah, that's been pushed back only because we were waiting for some covers, and we wanted to launch with the Silvestri cover and a few other things that we had to do. So it actually, I was trying to get it in for the February solicits, but I don't think I made it. We finally got all the covers and all the material, and we actually have multiple issues of that book done. So every time we push it back a month, it's actually a benefit, really, because it means the book will never be late. I mean, we're planning on doing a 25-issue run on that that's consecutive with no skip months. And we're working with a team that can make that happen. So it looks like probably March, unfortunately. I mean, that's 3 months later than I was expecting. But the good news is by the time the first issue comes out, we'll probably actually have 5 issues done.
Yeah. And you might be able to, promote or bring some of it to Emerald City, I guess, at that point, too.
Yeah, I'm definitely doing I'm definitely doing ECC this year myself, so I'll be there.
Yeah, excellent. You had mentioned, on the topic of adaptations, one of the ones that had been announced at San Diego, Eclipse, is in development, and I know Zach's about to launch Port of Earth with you guys on November 8th.
Right. Yeah, I really like, and I've been lucky this last couple years in the projects I've picked up. I don't do it a lot. If you look at the stuff we picked up in the last 2 years, it's really just been the Zach Kaplan stuff and the Glitch stuff, the God Complex and that stuff. So this last, I've picked well of recent, so I'm pretty happy with that. And Zach is honestly this guy that the crazy thing about Eclipse is it was kind of a lucky thing because I owed Mikhail Nayfeld a favor, and he is his manager. He works for a company called Heroes and Villains, and he was Zach's writing manager, like his film and TV writing manager. And he said, hey, this guy, one of our clients, has this really cool idea. And so I kind of did it as a favor to Mikhail, and then it was awesome. We hooked him up with Giovanni Timpano, and the book itself came out, and it was a really solid quality book. So all in all, very, very happy with that. And then once I realized how badass Zach was, and he pitched Port of Earth, picked it up immediately, and there's going to be a big announcement actually in the next week on some TV adaptation stuff for both of those.
Oh boy. No, I mean, we've always gotten along pretty great with Zach. I mean, I think we were his first, we broke his podcast cherry, and for some reason he keeps coming back for more. Speaking of which, I remember the last time you were on the show, you were thinking about starting up your own podcast. Did that ever gel?
Well, here's the thing, and I don't know if you guys ever have this, and maybe I'm just being weird, is I recorded multiple episodes of a podcast that I wanted to do, and then I started listening to how I sounded, and I felt like I sounded so stupid, like my voice, not what I was saying, but my voice itself, it just annoyed me that I killed it.
Oh, wow. I mean, I feel like...
We all go through that phase.
Very self-conscious, yeah. I think we all, like, I'm pretty sure that, like, I mean, Jake sounds like Kermit the Frog whenever he's on. So I don't think that's just a you thing. I think everybody kind of, it's like when you see pictures of yourself and you're like, that's not the face I see in the mirror every morning. That's something that, does the camera actually add 15 pounds, or does the microphone make me actually sound like a bit of an ass? Yeah, I think there's a difference there.
Right. I should do it. I mean, the other thing was I didn't realize, and this is kudos to you guys, I did not realize how much work it is. Because, I mean, my format I was planning to do was more of kind of an informational podcast where I was talking about, science, technology, and books I write and this kind of stuff. And that, where you're just monologuing for 45 minutes or however long it is it's quite tedious to set up and queue up and figure out what to do. Where you have this sort of back and forth discussion and you have guests on and you have multiple people talking. I think that lends itself to being not easier to do, but less research intensive to try to set it up. Because I found out what I was essentially doing was taking shit tons of notes on what I wanted to talk about. And it became there's this podcaster I really like. I'm trying to remember his name. Dan something. He does this history podcast, and it sort of became like that. And then I realized that when he does his podcast, he talks about how, this podcast I spent took me 12 days to prep for, and I'm like, you know what? I don't have that kind of time. So that's ultimately, if I could find a couple people that I could bounce around, some ideas and some conversations, because most of this information I have in my head. But when I'm sitting down to talk about, like, I'm going to do a podcast on genetically modified food, what it means, and this story I wrote, why I did it. And his name's Dan Carlin. He's got a show called Hardcore History. I was just looking it up on my phone. But I love that podcast because it's detail intensive. But he only posts like an episode every other month. So but every time I listen to it, it's fascinating to me. It's just full of massive amounts of information. But no, I'm still interested in doing it. I've always liked radio, and I like talking about. I just think the unique areas, with the sex stuff we're doing with Sunstone, science and technology and religion. These are all the things that fascinate me, and I would love to have some sort of an open forum podcast on that, because I think there's a lot of people that like that stuff too.
Oh yeah. I mean, I think those are I like podcasts where I like actually learn something, not like, all due respect to the comedy podcast and that sort of thing, but I don't really listen to Nerdist, because Nerdist is really just like Chris Hardwick and his guests like comparing neuroses, which is fine if you like that, but I don't want to be a witness to somebody else's therapy, right?
Right.
But you mentioned the importance of science. Obviously, you've got the master's degree in science. You've got David Lauren, who is cutting edge military technology with science lessons in every single issue of Think Tank. With Stairway, you're looking at data that can be stored in DNA strands. Yeah,
this is all. I mean, the story Stairway itself is obviously fiction, but in 2012, some Harvard geneticists actually discovered that there was a way to record data on DNA. They were looking for like biological sort of ways to store data and information. And they figured out a way to do it. In fact, they just announced like a few months ago that they recorded an entire movie on DNA and were able to play it back. And I think they were saying that all of mankind's information and knowledge could be stored in DNA that would fit inside a single room. And if you think about all the server farms we have all over the world, we're nowhere near that now. So the idea of storing data on DNA is really groundbreaking and pretty amazing. So I got sort of interested in that, and then I started following, because when I was in school, we used to call junk DNA, the DNA that we didn't know what it did. And when the Human Genome Project and all that stuff sort of happened, we realized that about 98% of DNA, we don't know what it does. And only 2% of it is actually coding, which creates proteins and is what's used to, basically make life. And so there's a lot of theories that the other 98% was, just genetic sort of offspring kind of stuff, like from evolutionary, like mutations that aren't used, or, rhinoviruses from thousands of years ago that have been stored in here. But what we've discovered in the last few years is that almost all of that DNA has a purpose. There really is no junk DNA. There's all kinds of markers and things that affect, like your facial structure is affected by non-coding DNA. And one of the most fascinating things I learned, I actually just learned this a couple days ago, is that if you remove most of the facial sort of forming of DNA, that most people's faces sort of gel into a single form, and there's not as much diversity in physical appearance, which is quite fascinating. They did this with mice at MIT, I think it was. I don't remember. Don't quote me on that. But you can look it up, the research they did with mice in removing the non-coding DNA from facial features. They sort of bred it out when they inserted it. And so I get fascinated by all this stuff, and most people kind of roll their eyes because it's kind of boring. But, when I started thinking about it, I'm like, there really is no reason why, if there's that much space in DNA, why someone couldn't have recorded a shit ton of information there like 10 million years ago, and I started thinking about that, and I'm like, if you were going to put information, like let's say you were a god or even just an advanced civilization, and you created something else, and you wanted to store information that would be passed down for hundreds and hundreds of generations. If you built a temple, if you wrote a book, you wrote some documents, these things would be altered, or they would be decimated over time. The only real foolproof way where your message would be maintained throughout millennia would be possibly to write it into someone's DNA. So the idea here with Stairway is that this woman, Alicia Vikander, who's a research scientist, a geneticist, she discovers by doing research on her own DNA that there's this weird information encoded, and she figures out how to decode it, and she starts realizing that there's all kinds of weird things that are recorded in DNA, like bioschematics of other organisms. There's weird schematics and blueprints for technological things that we don't even know how to build. There are other elements that we don't even know what they are, where they're sort of explained and broken down. So, but the DNA is not like all in one person. It's sort of been scattered around. It's been degraded. So the idea of Stairway is that we have to figure out how to comb the earth and think about the logistical nightmare of having to comb every human on the planet to try to decode information from their DNA, assimilate it, and put together so you could build things. I mean, that's an insane logistical nightmare, just given the nationalities that are in conflict and country borders and all these sort of things. So there's all kinds of interesting problems. Where would you build these things if you had the wherewithal to actually build them and the money? And then thirdly, should you even do it in the first place? The idea of like Jurassic Park. If we build this thing, is it going to cause a viral apocalypse? What are we doing? Are we creating a race of apex predators that's going to wipe us all out? And so that's essentially what the story is about. And there's a guy whose name is Arthur Hopkins, and he's kind of the bad guy, but not really, because what he does is he's the one funding this research and getting her sort of going, but he has like ulterior motives, and there's other things going on. So it's a fun story. I think it worked better as a graphic novel, which is one of the reasons why I opted to go with this. Sometimes when you write comics and you have to do these crazy cliffhanger endings, with each issue, and you write each issue as if it's like a TV show, that's not always easy to do. And there's certain stories that just don't lend themselves to that. I can't tell you how many. It happens in Image a lot, where I'll read the 32-page books of some project that come out, and it doesn't really grab my interest. Or Dark Horse does this too. Everyone does it. There's all kinds of comic projects where you read the first issue, and you're like, it's a lot of setup, not much happened, and then I read the trade when it comes out, and I'm like, oh, I get it now. This was really fucking cool. There's just some stories that work better that way.
Yeah. What made Rafe the right artist for this book? And then of course I assume he's working on Symmetry probably right now too.
Yeah, he's working on Symmetry Volume 3. He's working on a DC thing at the same time. So Symmetry Volume 3 probably won't be out till late 2018. But Stairway he finished 6 months ago. I mean, we've been working on that for a while. And No, Rafe was the right guy. He called it, he used to be Raphael to me, but he just changed it to Rafe. And so I'm calling him Rafe now because I think that's what he's calling himself. But he's still Raphael to me. Here's the thing. When he did Symmetry, I really liked the particularly Symmetry Volume 2. I mean, he had such amazing sci-fi backdrops because we had sort of that, what Shanghai would look like, what Tanzania would look like. I had the various racial groups from Symmetry and their sort of headquarters that they were doing. So seeing sort of the science fiction backdrops that he did and sort of the character, he's just such an expressive artist. And I just like working with him. If you look at the various projects I do, I tend to work with the same people. And it's because I develop a rapport with these guys, and I really like them. I've been working with the Sedgicks for years. I've been working with Rasan Ekadal and Isaac Goodhart. And so I work, and Yishan Lee and I are planning multiple volumes of Sugar. So I'm hoping that book takes off. So I get comfortable with certain artists and learn how to work with them, and I kind of take care of them so they want to keep coming back and working with me.
Well, speaking of taking care of artists and kind of paying it forward, Top Cow is in the middle of their talent hunt contest, and this will certainly go up it'll go up tomorrow. But how has the talent contest been this year?
It's always, I do these things every time. I don't know if you noticed, but there's actually a year break between each one because by the time we do it and we finish it, it's so exhausting that we're like, okay, we're never doing that again. And then about 6 to 9 months later, we're like, we see all these people thanking us for doing it. No one else does these kind of things. And and now DC does one. I actually think DC has kind of picked it up because we sort of, been pushing it because this is our 5th one. And it's good. It's good. I think it's good to get new blood into the industry. And honestly, it's just a way to get people exposed that might not otherwise be exposed to the industry. You look at some of the winners like Teenie Howard. There's just several people that are regularly working in the industry now that got in through our talent hunt. And that's kind of cool. It makes me happy to see them working. I don't have enough books or a big enough line to publish all of them all the time. So seeing them go off and flourish makes me very happy. This year, we're already through the first round where we gave feedback, and that's just been done. So everyone should have the feedback. So if anybody's listening to this and they have not received feedback and they did turn in the project for feedback, they need to email us and let us know because something slipped through the crack or the email got lost or whatever, because we want to make sure everyone gets their feedback. But the final deadline is December 15th. And everyone that turns in, and if you didn't turn it in for the early deadline, that's fine. December 15th is fine if we've not received it prior to that. And we'll read all those and pick the winner probably sometime in January or February. And usually the way that works is Ryan, Katie, and a couple other people will read all of them, and they'll sort of slim it down to like 10 or 20 of the writing ones, and then I'll read those and pick the winner. And then Mark does the same thing for the artist. Sylvester will actually we'll slim it down to like a top 20 or 30, and we'll send those to him, and then he'll pick the winner.
Yeah. This is the 25th anniversary of Top Cow. We're about to enter 2018. We've kind of talked about some of the big stuff that you guys have kind of percolating. But yeah, what can we expect from Top Cow as they cross into their second quarter century?
Wow, that's a good question. I mean, I know what we're doing for the next 2 or 3 years, but it always kind of shifts, I mean, we kind of we tend to not. I don't think we follow trends necessarily, but we tend to follow stuff that works for us. And sometimes what works for us is not even what other people are doing. Like Sunstone is a great example. I mean, we've got multiple titles over the next 2 or 3 or 4 years that'll be coming out in sort of that quote Sunstone universe. And that was not anything. If you'd asked me 6 years ago, that wouldn't even have been on my radar. So, and there's not anyone else in the industry that's doing a lot of those types of books. So we're kind of servicing a fan and a reader that doesn't seem to be well served by other people. So I think a lot of that is because the books are sex positive. They're written in kind of an authentic way. And the people that are into that kind of thing are very supportive and very loud, and word of mouth sort of spreads. And they're fun reads. I mean, Sedgicks do just amazing fun stuff. And he's got more stuff he wants to do with Death Vigil. There's going to be a lot more. I mean, Sedgwick has a ton of stuff he wants to do. We're going to continue. He's got his second arc of Sunstone is called Mercy, Sunstone: Mercy. He's planning 5 volumes of that, which will come out over 3 or 4 years. So, that's sort of a long arc. And he actually has a third arc of Sunstone already planned, which will be another 5 volumes, which is going to be another 3 or 4 years. So you've got probably another 10 years of Sunstone. And the sort of the peripheral stuff sort of feeding off of that. So there's definitely going to be a large event for that. Sort of relaunching Cyberforce. We have a new Aphrodite Aphrodite 5 series that this artist Jeffrey Spokes is drawing, and it's amazing. I mean, Brian Hill wrote that. It's sort of a near-term future that fits into the sort of Cyberforce and Aphrodite stuff I'd done in the past. I do want to do a new Aphrodite 9 book, so that's definitely on the slate, sometime in the next 2 or 3 years. And, I do a lot of these one-off things that I have ideas for. And I have a feeling we'll probably be doing more Warframe books because that's been very well received. And I think the guys at Digital Extremes have been happy with what we did. But we don't do sort of a lot of that stuff. It's more internally generated ideas. The first half of the year is pretty much mapped out. There's a book called Vindication that we're doing. It's written by Michelle Davis. Kind of a courtroom racial drama. Should be interesting. I'm probably missing a few things. The Glitch books, there's a third one called Dissonance, which has not been solicited yet. I think that comes out in January or February. And I know they're planning at least 12 issues of God Complex. So that stuff will definitely reign throughout 2018. And, Port of Earth is planned for an extension. And I know Zach's working on Eclipse Volume 3. So more Zach Kaplan stuff. I'm continuing to write tons of stuff. So, there'll be all my stuff. And then Silvestri, once he wraps up his DC project, will probably be back developing and writing and doing a project for Top Cow. There is a new Witchblade, which we're planning on doing a long run on with the new creative team, Caitlin Kittredge and Roberta in Granada. Some of that stuff's starting to come out now. And I know we, at some point, we will relaunch a Darkness title. We've yet to find the right team or the right take. That one's just hard because most of the people that come in and pitch us on it are pitching sort of more of a classic take because they're a fan of the original stuff, and that's actually not what we want. So we're looking for something new and what's next. So it's never easy,
That could be your talent hunt for 2018. Reboot.
Could be. No, I have a feeling we're going to skip 2018. The next talent hunt will probably be 2019. Fair enough. Like I said, I think we do these things every other year.
Actually, Bria just put out the press release for Dissonance. So, yeah, that's out in the ether now.
Cool. Yeah. I didn't know that had been announced. Okay, cool. I know we gave her a quote for that. But I'm trying to think of what else that might be out there. The other thing in terms of like writing opportunities is actually in the Stairway Kickstarter, we're doing an experiment. I've already had like half a dozen people ask me about this that have interest in it, but we listed out what I'm calling a writer's room tier. And the idea of it is, I'm going to run a writer's room kind of thing where a couple Saturdays people can come to the Top Cow office or they can come in through Skype. And we're going to workshop an idea for each person as a group, and I'm going to work with them to develop out a short story that Top Cow will then publish as part of an anthology book, an anthology one-shot. The creators will own their original idea. What we'll do is we'll help them find the artist for it. We'll take care of the artist and the printing of the anthology book. We'll recoup our costs out of the book itself. But then these ideas are owned by the underlying people, and they can do whatever the fuck they want with them. And so that's kind of an interesting idea. I mean, I actually really like working with writers, and particularly young, up and coming, like hungry, humble and self-deprecating is always good, by the way. And so we're sort of reserving the right to, even if people pledge, we might not accept them. We might refund them their money. We're working on like a little thing for that. But the idea is, you have an opportunity to come in and work directly with me. We'll hire an artist for you. You'll own all of it. You'll own the underlying rights. We won't take any of those rights away from you. And you will get like a 6 to 8 page story or a 10-page story published in this anthology comic that will come out from Top Cow through Image Comics. And then you have a signature calling card you can use, which is the same thing that Talent Hunt people did. They used their published books to go try to get other work, which is, how it is. It's very hard to get work from publishers if you haven't been published already. So there's this weird, circular thing where if you haven't been published, it's impossible to get published. So you have to self-publish, which is why I always recommend that people do webcomics.
Yeah. I do have to ask, you mentioned 6 years ago you never saw yourself doing a book like Sunstone. Here we are, 2 deluxe hardcovers later. You're about to expand the universe with Swing and Sugar. What was that what sold you on the Sedgwick's pitch for Sunstone back in the day?
I hate to say this, dude, but it falls in line of what I said with Eclipse. It was a favor to a friend, really. I mean, he wanted to get the stuff published in print. It looked like he had a significant number of people that were reviewing it online. I was putting it out for him more as a favor to get it in print for him. I had no idea it would become this cultural phenomenon, which is honestly what it's become. I don't know if you know, but we sold more copies of the Sunstone calendar than the Walking Dead one. If you look at Image's numbers for the Sunstone calendar, it exceeds the Walking Dead calendar. So that's amazing to me, that this has such a hardcore fan base that it would do that kind of crazy numbers. We actually went back to press on a stupid calendar. So it was just a lot of this business for me. I've been in this for 24 years, almost 20. I missed the first 11 months of Image, but I've been there since almost the very beginning. And it really is all about relationships. And, you get to work with people, you feel comfortable with them. And, Cedric had done, he had done 5 years on Witchblade. He'd done 2 years on Aphrodite 9 with me. And he had been doing this webcomic, which seemed like it got a lot of views. It was a bit of a sales job for me for Silvestri, because Silvestri looked at it and said, "This is like a sex book. Isn't this what we were trying to get away from this 90s sort of bad girl thing?" I'm like, that's not what it is. It was kind of one of those weird things where, because we sort of made that concerted effort to get away from that sort of bad girl crap. And this was sort of an interesting step, because if you look at all the 90s stuff that we did, we never actually showed any full nudity or any actual sex, and Sunstone has hardcore sex in it. It's a mature reader's title. It's very sexual. But it's different. I mean, there's one thing putting a girl in a sexual pose where, guys are just ogling it. There's another thing where it's about a relationship between these two women and kind of the emotional bonding and how that works. Everything's about context. It really, really is. And, we found an audience, and it's like I said, sometimes you do things on a whim or as a favor, and you ride that into the sunset.
Yeah. Well, I guess, Matt, as we get close to the hour mark, just to close us out, something we always ask everybody that comes on: what are you currently geeking out over?
What am I currently geeking out over? Everyone is bashing this new Star Trek Discovery series. I love it. I mean, I really do love it. I've been watching it and analyzing it, and I understand why people don't like it, but I am quite enjoying it. I'm actually a huge Jason Isaacs fan. He makes such a great bad guy. It's interesting to see him sort of as trying to be like a heroic kind of anti-hero captain. But I don't know if you guys have seen it, but I'm quite enjoying that. I just watched the first season of The Exorcist, and I quite enjoyed that. I think that's a very underrated TV show. I had very low expectations for it, but just kind of binged it the other day, and I'm looking forward to watching the second season. My movie, I think I'm an old man now because I don't go to the movie theater anymore. So I watch things when they come out digitally. So for me, I just saw the Spider-Man, the last one, the one that everyone likes. I liked it too. I just saw that a couple weeks ago when it came out on digital. I saw Wonder Woman like that. I'm easygoing. If the stuff entertains me and it's not just ridiculously stupid, I tend to like it.
No drive to see Blade Runner 2049 in theaters?
Nope, haven't seen it. I'll see it when it comes out on digital. I'll tell you what. The only movie and I've already reserved my tickets. I will go see Star Wars in the theater. And I've seen every Star Wars in the theater. I'm 48, so I was 7 when Star Wars came out in the theaters in 1977, and I saw it on the day it came out, May 25th, 1977, in Wichita, Kansas, with my sister and my grandmother. And I'll never forget that because there was only 3 of it. We were the only people in the theater.
Oh, wow.
People tend to think of Star Wars as being this massive thing, and it is. But when it launched, no one knew what it was. And the crazy thing is if that launched today and there was only 3 people in the theater, it would have come and went so fast, no one would have paid attention. But, movies were in theaters for months back then, because there weren't that many films. So my sister and I saw it on that whatever that day was. We came back like a week later and the theater was packed. It was really crazy because we saw it, no one in the theater. We saw like a matinee. And then we came back a week later and it was like packed. So it's weird when I think about that. So I am looking forward to the new Star Wars.
Are you more, since you've invoked both Discovery and Last Jedi, do you have any greater allegiance to the Trek world or the Star Wars world?
No, I never pulled that. I know people do that. I used to play this game called Starfleet Battles, which was sort of a tabletop Starfleet game, and I loved that game so much when I was a kid. But I preferred Star Wars, I think, as a kid. I think I've probably shifted to Star Trek as an adult. I found I really enjoyed Rogue One. I found TFA to be a little ridiculous because it seemed to me it was the same movie I'd already seen, and I really wanted to see something new, which is why I'm hoping this episode 8 is good and different. I'm hoping Luke Skywalker does something fun, and but everyone fan serviced out on TFA, but that one wasn't. I didn't love it. I didn't hate it. I did buy it when it came out on digital, and I've watched it a few times. But Rogue One I thought was kick-ass. I really liked Rogue One. Rogue One is what re-energized me, honestly, on Star Wars. And see, here's the thing with Star Trek. I like the TV shows. I haven't liked the last couple of Star Trek films. I like the new reboot first one, and then there have been 3, right? Or have there been 4 now? I don't even know.
Just 3, yeah.
There's been 3. I love the first one. I thought the first Star Wars, the one where Chris Hemsworth dies in the first 10 minutes or whatever it is, love that fucking film. The second film I liked a lot less. The third film I liked a lot less. So I'm hoping, if they do another Star Trek film, it's better. But my favorite Star Trek film was still Wrath of Khan from whatever year that was.
82.
But
I want to say it was 82, somewhere around there.
Was it 82? Yeah, I love that movie. I've seen that movie a million times.
Oh, it's my favorite. I still choke up. I mean, sound like such a fucking softie, but I still choke up watching the climax of that film, even though I know Spock's going to come back like in the next movie, but the characters don't know that. I just every time I watch Spock bite it and honestly, I cry at the end of Search for Spock because his friendship with Kirk survives death and resurrection. It's just a very touching moment.
Well, the thing is when you actually go back and if you were alive and knew the history of it, they didn't know there were going to be other movies. It wasn't like they knew there were going to be other movies. I mean, there were in the press, like, they would be talking about, like William Shatner, these people would be talking about, this is probably the last Star Trek movie, and because no one knew if they would do well, and it used to be where the even movies were the awesome ones, like 2, 4, and 6. And then I kind of lost track, so I don't even know how many there were, but I love 2, 4, and 6. Those movies are awesome. The Wales one I loved, the Wrath of Khan, and then I think 6 was Undiscovered Country. I love that film. Some of the other ones, not so much. Nemesis and Generations, and some of these kind of they lost track. But I love science fiction, and I'll tell you the main reason I love science fiction is because it teaches us things about morality and humanity that other shows and movies are afraid to do, because they can do them in a context where you can do stuff about racism and a racial divide by having it be an alien species on another planet, and people can learn the moral lesson, and it can be confronted and discussed in a way that wouldn't necessarily be as easy to discuss in a contemporary setting film. And I've always – you look at Arthur C. Clarke and Isaac Asimov and some of these writers that I grew up with, and which sort of got me interested in this stuff. They created modern science. You look at scientists from my generation, and they've wanted to create all the tech that they read in these books as a kid. You look at the modern cell phone, and it is kind of the communicator from Star Trek. You look at the tricorder exists now. You look at all these things, they exist. Geosynchronous satellites was from Arthur C. Clarke. He created that in a number of books. There's so much of this stuff that was just created by these guys, and created in a fictional setting. And then these scientists, as the technology evolved, were able to actually make these things. And having seen that in my lifetime and kind of read the stuff and then seen it come into creation, I gotta say that's pretty fucking cool. It makes me glad I've lived this long. Yeah, and you're writing science fiction, man. Maybe you're gonna inspire. Well, it's interesting because I guess you could argue with Stairway that hasn't quite happened yet, but with Think Tank, that was all that shit was real. Yeah. There was nothing in there that was the only stuff that I did some adaptation. It was application. That's the thing is I knew some of this technology existed. I knew there was something. Some of the stuff was guesswork by me, but it was fairly close. The only things that there's applications of technology that I really sort of looked at tech and I'm like, what could this be used for? And that's where a lot of the Think Tank stories actually came from. Right on. Well, Matt, anything else you want to plug before we sign off? The Stairway Kickstarter runs until November 21st. Yeah, I mean, we're already, like I said, go look at that. Watch the 2-minute video. If you like the book, you can get the digital version for $10. You can buy the printed version that I'll sign for $15. And I think if you're in the U.S., the freight is like $8. So for $23, you can get the signed 128-page graphic novel from me in the mail, along with a couple stickers and maybe like a mini litho or something like that. There's some other tiers and some other options. We tried to make it more accessible from a price point. I know a lot of times people on Kickstarters go for hardcovers and they do a lot. They go for a higher price point item. I mean, for us and for me, what I'm trying to do is I'm really trying to build a hardcore audience of people that buy my stuff. They like my work and they follow me on the feeds and they follow my work, because that's, people selling 20 variants of this or 20 variants of that, or this nude cover or that nude cover. Those people are very fickle, and it's very difficult to maintain fans. Almost all the Zenoscope and some of these companies that do a lot of that, they have fans that we used to have because we used to fan service that stuff. But I don't miss those people. Honestly, I don't have an issue with it. I'm fine with everyone doing whatever it is they want to do. But ultimately, we're trying to build an audience of people that like what we write and they want to read it, and that actually has longevity, because once if you find someone that reads your stuff and Stephen King calls them constant readers, and he's had the same people that have been reading his books for 40 years or whatever it is, and that's ultimately what Mark Silvestri and I now are trying to do, is we're trying to build up sort of a readership, because there's all this fear about the comic book market, the comic book industry, and all these various things. And the reality of it is we're selling tons of books through Kickstarter, through the Top Cow store, through conventions. I'm always amazed at how many books we move at conventions. And I'll talk to people that come buy all these books from us, and they're like, "Oh, I never even saw that these came out in the stores," because we don't always get a lot of support from retailers, and they have a hard job. And I understand that most of their money goes to Marvel and DC and Saga and Walking Dead, and everything else gets whatever it gets. But there's a market for what we do, and I've told people this for a long time. You don't need 150,000 readers. You can make a good living on 15,000 readers.
Right on, man. Yeah, I mean, there's 15,000 is better than some of the big two these days.
Well, and that's you look at most of the books. Like I said, I've sold 35,000 copies of Think Tank Volume 1, or that's roughly what it is. And Postal Volume 1 is now going into its third printing, so we're achieving about a 15,000 mark for that. And I look at these books and they're being read, and people are coming back and buying the subsequent volumes. And it's a good feeling. Everyone keeps crying the death knell or all these problems in the industry, and I'm just like, I'm saying, look, I said, no, we're doing great. Our numbers are up this year. We're selling in a lot of different areas that we didn't previously sell. We sell probably 75% of Sunstone through Amazon. That's doing huge numbers, and it's almost all through Amazon. We're just going where the stuff sells.
Right on, man. Well, Matt, thanks again for coming on the show. Keep an eye out for that, the Kickstarter for Stairway. Check out any number of Top Cow books, both new and old, and keep an eye out for New Witchblade, Port of Earth, The Return of Symmetry in 2018. Yeah, Warframe, God Complex. You guys got a lot of stuff out there on the market. You guys are doing good.
New Cyberforce, don't forget that one.
New Cyberforce 2018, hopefully March. Yeah. All right. Well,
right on.
Thanks again, Matt.
Thanks, guys. Thank you so much.
This has been another Geek Out production. If you enjoyed what you heard, hey, we've got a special episode every Friday. Of course, there's the usual catching up show every Wednesday, and you get book club episodes just about every Tuesday these days. Thanks for listening.